Hello and welcome to the Classroom Professor Math Podcast. This program is designed to help you to prepare and teach mathematics more easily, efficiently and effectively, to truly engage your students in mathematical thinking and to develop their numeracy.
G'day everyone, I'm Dr. Peter Price, co-founder of Classroom Professor. Welcome back to the podcast. Before I start this week's episode, I'd just like to make a quick request. If you like this podcast, please go to iTunes and give us a rating. I don't mind if you give us 1 star even. I'd just like to have some comments and some feedback from teachers who are watching the podcast, just to know what you think of it. So anyway, on to this week's episode, episode 15. I'm just doing a quick introduction now and I'll do a short recap at the end. There are 2 segments coming up which I filmed in the UK, both in historical sites, one in Wiltshire at Stonehenge and one in Wales at Cardiff Castle. So they're both historical, but the connection I want to make with math this week is with science and technology. In both situations there are aspects of science and tech which can be used to inform a math lesson and make all sorts of cross-curricular connections. So without any further ado, here's the first part at Stonehenge, and then we'll follow straight up with the one from Cardiff. I hope you enjoy it. Hi everyone, it's Peter Price of Classroom Professor, and today I'm on location at Stonehenge in the south of England, in Wiltshire. I expect you recognise it's pretty well known all around the world. Today I want to focus a little bit on the connection between science and maths. Obviously this site is principally of historical interest, and there's a word I learned today, archaeoastronomy. Never come across that word before. The experts who've studied this place make up archaeologists as well as astronomers and experts from other fields as well. And they actually don't know why this was built, so I was hoping today that I might find out with the audio recording that they give you to walk around with, but they still don't know. So they think it's probably partly religious and partly scientific. What they can say is that on a particular day every year the sun rises in a location that lines up with the rocks and the gaps between the rocks and so on. And that day, of course, is the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, when the sun is furthest to the north when it rises and sets. So there's a connection here between the ancient people some 3,500 years ago and science, and an absolutely amazing structure that would take considerable effort today, even with big machines, and it boggles the imagination to think how ancient people built it with just their bare hands and a few rudimentary tools. But anyway, here's an example of where you can connect math and science. And so you can do a science lesson with a math connection, you can do a math lesson with a science connection, talk about summer solstice and winter solstice, and make a lot of really useful connections that way, and show your students how the math can be used in an investigation of a site like this. I'm now in Cardiff in Wales, in the rain, so I'm not going to be terribly long today. We're at Cardiff Castle, and you can see behind me there's a recent construction of a trebuchet, a military weapon from the Middle Ages that was used to attack castles and no doubt other enemy emplacements. So this is obviously a place that teachers can bring their classes to, and the students will have a lot of fun investigating the castle. And we just climbed up the tower you can see behind me and so on, and the students would have a great time. But the trebuchet is particularly interesting because it's a piece of working equipment. Today they're not using it, but I'm sure that on certain days of the year they have people here who will actually show you how it worked, and that would be just great for students to look at. This is probably something that you'd study as part of a technology lesson rather than purely maths or even science. And there are a lot of technological factors here that need to be investigated. I've seen models in photographs on the internet that students have made in class of working model trebuchets, and that's an obvious extension of a visit like this, to have students make their own. And in doing that, they would have to do a lot of investigation, a lot of trial and error to test it and see how it worked. And you could easily connect that with mathematics, and so give the maths an application in the technology investigations. So you'd be investigating the weights that are used, both the weight or mass of the counterweight. You can see that at the bottom there. That one appears to be full of rocks and pieces of metal to make it heavy. And then the weight or mass of the projectile, the length of the arm, the length of the rope that the projectile is attached to, and so on. And you could easily set your students a challenge once they had a working model to see who could propel their projectile safely the greatest distance. And so there'd be a lot of mathematics involved, and if I was doing it, I'd probably graph the results, enter the numbers into a spreadsheet, draw a graph of the result, and do a real experiment and a test about distances against weights and lengths and that sort of thing. So this would appear to be something that your students would enjoy if you had access to a site like this. I don't think we have many trebuchets in Australia, although there probably are some. But certainly in Great Britain, there are a lot of old castles like this one in Cardiff. And already today I've looked on websites, and there's 2 different castles in this area that both have working trebuchets. So it's something that you could bring your students to see. And again, it gives a connection for the mathematics that they're learning to something real, and something that in days gone by would have been extremely important, and even a matter of life and death. So there's another idea. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed those 2 excerpts from Stonehenge and Cardiff Castle. I just want to talk briefly at the end of this video about how you might connect science, technology and math together into a lesson. I understand that for many teachers in primary or elementary classes, science and technology and math are not necessarily their strong suit. They're not the subjects that they really have a passion for and enjoy. But I believe that if you have some idea about pedagogy, if you have good pedagogy, if you know how to engage students in thinking, and you can engage the, as it were, the brain power of the students themselves to think about what's going on, that will energize their learning without you having to be an actual discipline expert in those areas. So let me give you 3 suggestions, and they're very straightforward ones, for using mathematics in science or technology, or the other way around, using science or technology in maths. First of all, measure. In science or technology, if you're doing it properly, you'll have things to measure. So teach your students how to use measuring instruments, and particularly how to use them accurately and carefully, and engage them, and get them to work out what it is we should be measuring. How are we going to compare this? We've just tested that, we're doing an experiment over here. What do we need to measure in order to make sense of it? So measure things. The second step from there, of course, is to put the measurements into a table. And I would teach students how to use spreadsheets, and that's another link you can make to another curriculum area. Get them to put the results in a table, because that's how the results will naturally fall out. If you're doing comparisons or tests or trials or in any sort of experiment, there will naturally be comparisons between different iterations or different treatments or different versions of a piece of technology or something. Put the results in a table, and then the third step is to make a graph. Of course, graphs can be drawn by hand. That's the way we did it in the old days, but nowadays spreadsheets are so good at doing graphs. You can talk all about the sorts of graphs that you could do and how you best present the data and how you make it plain and clear to people who are looking at it and so on. Those 3 simple ideas will inject a whole lot of mathematics into science and technology lessons without you having to do a whole lot about it. So students will, as I said before, start to make the connections. The ones who love science and technology, like I was when I was a child, will get all enthused about it and go, that's fantastic, I have so much fun with science and maths and technology, and they'll just love what they're doing. So some simple ideas. That's it for this week. Hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and I'll speak to you next time.
Thank you for joining me on the Classroom Professor Math podcast. You can email me via peter@classroomprofessor.com or follow me on Twitter with the username Peter_Price. You can also visit our website at www.classroomprofessor.com to download free resources including the ebook 10 Minutes a Day Times Tables Worksheets. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please go and rate the show on iTunes. I look forward to speaking with you next time, and until then, goodbye.